Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Daily Shred. I'm your host, Jim Schultz, and today I want to talk about training in your 40s. This topic is a little near and dear to my heart now that I just turned 40 a couple of months ago, and so I thought, hey, let's take a couple of minutes, 2, 3, maybe like 17, and let's unpack what does it look like to train in your 40s? Like, how should your training change? How should your training evolve? Like, what should you be focused on? And all the things in between. So that is our topic today, training in your 40s. And before we get into a couple of specific things that I wanted to talk about and address here today, I think it's really important that we all understand something just as our base, as our foundation. This is not going to look too different from your training in your 20s and your 30s. Like, it's not going to look too dissimilar. And the main reason why is because your goal, my goal, anyone's goal is still going to be the same. If we assume that we are in this for physique development, right? Like, we're not talking about some athletic pursuit. Like, we're not talking about some, specific athletic endeavor that requires, a very sport specific focus like marathon or sprinting or yard work or whatever it might be. If we're talking about physique development, right, this is going to be the case for every single one of us. We want to focus on progressive overload. Like, we want to focus on overloading our muscles from session to session and week to week and month to month and year to year. That's still going to be the same, even though we are in our 40s now. We're not in our 20s. We're not in our 30s. Okay, that's the important caveat. Is it going to look a little different? Like, are we going to maybe approach this in a slightly different way? Of course we are. And we're going to talk about that in the next couple of minutes. But before we get into it, I thought it would be very useful to dig into, I've got a quote right here in front of me from my boy Alberto Nunez, who is a natural professional bodybuilder. He's a WNBF pro, if I'm not mistaken. He might be professional in some of the other organizations too, but WNBF is kind of the coup de grace of natural bodybuilding. All my natty BBers out there, that's what we were going for there. You guys know what I'm saying. WNBF is kind of top of the food chain when it comes to the prestige of the organizations. Well, Alberto said a great quote when it comes to just training in general, but especially for those of us that, we're a little brittle these days, right? I mean, turning 40, like, it's a little different how the old joints and tendons and muscles work and operate from one day to the next. One rep can't make you, but one rep can certainly break you. And so this is a quote that I think I heard Berto say this for the first time. It was a couple of years ago. And it really resonated with me. It resonated with me at 37, 38, 39 years old. It resonates with me even more as I continue to rehab from meniscus surgery. I had knee surgery about 3.5 weeks ago, which is going quite well. Thank you for those of you that have reached out and are interested and want to know how things are going. It's going pretty well. We're still working through some things, but definitely pretty happy with where we're at. This quote, though, man, it's front and center. Like, this quote is absolutely on the front of my mind right now. And it's just a reminder that, one rep can never make you. One rep will never make you, but it can absolutely break you. And, our invincibility or the invincibility of our 20s and our 30s can kind of shield some really, really bonehead moves, right? Like, it can really shield some really poor decision making in the moment. But 40s, 50s, 60s, I imagine. I mean, we'll have some, new YouTube content when we hit 50, when we hit 60. Like, we've got a couple of decades, coming on down the chutes. We got at least 2 more videos coming on down in the near future here. You guys know what I'm saying. I mean, it's got to be this way even to a greater degree, even more so than I even realize right now. But right now at 40, but even at 40, I do recognize the difference from 40 to 20 and 30. So, okay. Now that we're at our advanced age, right? Like, now that we've added a little seasoning to our lives, like, how should we approach progressive overload? Well, let me just give kind of an overall theme, and then we'll talk about a couple things specifically here in a second, specifically related to, progressive overload, and then also the recovery aspect of things, like the time between your workouts, the time between your sessions. I think that needs greater emphasis in our training protocols now. the first thing I want to bring up is this. When you look to progressively overload, there's different ways that you can do this, right? Like adding load to the bar is obviously a very natural way to progressively overload from one session to the next. And for most people that are a little bit younger, like for most people that are in their 20s, their 30s, and maybe they just started training, like this is the simplest, easiest way to progressively overload from one session to the next. But for those of us that are now in our 40s, especially those of us that have been training for a while, it's just not going to be that simple anymore. It's not going to be that simple that you can just add, a 5-pound plate to each side of the bar and call it a day. You can add a 2.5-pound plate to each side of the bar and call it a day. You could add a 1-pound plate to each side of the bar, and call it a day. Which, by the way, I picked up some 1-pound plates about 7 or 8 months ago. They're amazing. They're incredible because you can just add those tiny little guys on each side of the bar. It's like, yeah, I'm making some progress. And so keep that in mind. I would snag some of those if you guys can. But even still, you can't always do that. Like, you have to be more thoughtful. You have to be more strategic. You have to find ways to add reps to your sets. You have to find ways to, increase the range of motion for a given movement, right? Like, this is another way where you can, progressively overload when it comes to your work, but when it comes to the sessions and the sets that you're putting in. It's not always about load. It's not always about reps. It's not always about sets. Like, hey, check your range of motion. Right? Like, how does your range of motion look? How does your form look? How does your technique look? And hey, I'm not the form police. Like I think that using good technique is going to be a smart move 80 to 90% of the time. And by that, I mean, let me rephrase that. I think you should use good technique all the time. But I don't know if you need 100% strict form, like standing up against a wall to do your curls like all the time. I think having a little natural oomph, I think having a little natural flow to your reps is not only not a negative thing, I think it can be a really positive thing, right? Because you can maintain that intensity, you can kind of maintain that junkyard dog to you to keep some oomph in your sets and some passion and some fire in your reps. So I think that having a little bit of that in your sets is definitely not necessarily a bad thing. But now that we're in our 40s, it's like, man, I got to be more thoughtful about this. Like, how am I going to progressively overload? I need to think about my training sessions, right? Like, I need to really think about how I'm structuring my programs. Like, how am I setting this guy up from one day to the next? Like, what does this look like? And, how is my fatigue going to be managed throughout the week? And, am I going to try to, target more load on this movement, but maybe, keep the load the same on this movement and go after this a different way? Or here's another way. Maybe I can't progressively overload across the board. Right? Like, maybe I'm just not in a situation with my training anymore to where it makes sense for me to constantly try to beat the logbook day in and day out, week in and week out, across the board. Which, that's how I spent my 20s. That's how I spent my 30s, right? That's probably how you've spent your 20s and your 30s if you've been training for a while, where it's just like, man, it's mission critical that I destroy this logbook. Right? Like, I've got my logbook. This actually isn't my logbook. This is my daily devotional. But let's pretend like this is my logbook. It's actually a lot more important than my daily logbook. But if this were my logbook, it's like, man, I'm going to beat this guy. I'm going to beat this guy every single day. Right? This is my mission. And you know what? That'll get you pretty far. Especially when you're kind of new and you're a beginner. Like, that's going to carry you pretty far indeed. But there's going to come a point where you're not going to be able to do that. Because if there wasn't a point where we couldn't do that, then we'd all be bench pressing 1,000 pounds. We'd all be squatting 1,500 pounds. We'd all be, deadlifting 1,800 pounds. Like, and nobody is doing that. And so we have to figure out a way to adjust our training and to adjust our approach to our training, where it's like, all right, I'm not moving up on this exercise when it comes to load anymore. So how am I going to approach this, now? Like, what's my strategy going to be now? And I think this is especially important for those of us that are in our 40s, because now, right, we want to be mindful of joint health. We want to be mindful of tendon health and tendon strength. Whereas, again, you can kind of get away with a lot of this stuff in your 20s and your 30s. Like, you can bang your head against the wall for a while and you're pretty much invincible. Like, you really don't do too much damage. Now, maybe you're doing damage and it doesn't materialize until you're 40, 50, whatever. Like, I got it. Like, I understand that. But even still, being on the younger side, you can get away with a lot of things. Whereas now, we can't really do that anymore. Like, now we can't really get away with those things anymore. And so because of that, it's like, all right, I need to think about my joint health. I need to think about my tendon health. I need to think about, okay, what movements can I progressively overload on? Right, so on the one side of the camp, it's, what movements can I progressively overload on? Like, what movements do I like to do? What movements, just jive with my own personal biomechanics, whether it be a squat or a press or a deadlift or a row or a leg press or whatever, right? What movements just jive with me? They just feel right, and it's like stepping into an old slipper every time I do them. Okay. What movements don't hurt? Like, what movements can I do pretty pain-free, right? These two camps don't always agree with each other. Like, these two camps don't always overlap. And again, you're in your 20s, who cares? You're like, I'm not thinking about that. I want to do what's going to get me the gains, right? I'm going to do what I can just blast. I don't really care about, what doesn't hurt me, because most things won't hurt you in your 20s unless you've had a serious injury or whatever. Your 30s, that's still kind of the case, but every once in a while, you're kind of like, ooh, wow, that was a little something there in my left elbow, or my right wrist kind of didn't really love those barbell curls or whatever, right? Like, that starts to happen. Now that you're in your 40s, it's like, okay, if I don't go out of my way to make sure there's some overlap, then I'm going to run into some problems. And so as we progressively overload, right, I would encourage you guys, if you don't take too many things away from all of my ramblings here today, and there have been quite a few, most of which are not worth a whole lot, but if you take one thing away from the shred today, I would take this away, right? Like, think about the movements that you really like, and think about the movements that you can do pretty pain-free. Like, here, let me give you a couple of examples from my own training, and these are just kind of off the top of my head. I didn't necessarily prepare to give these examples because we've kind of gone down a little bit of a tangent, which it does happen from time to time. Barbell squats. I know that I can progress with barbell squats. They just make sense to me. They just feel really good from a progression standpoint. However, my triceps, my shoulders sometimes have some issues with low bar squats now. And I don't really want to do high bar squats because of my neck. And so I'm in some situations now, or a situation now, to where it's like, all right, is this really going to overlap? Is this really going to be a suitable, movement for me moving forward? The jury's still kind of out. I'm not exactly sure if I can do it, but it's not, just the automatic yes that it was for the first 20 years of my lifting career. Contrast that with another movement like, I don't know, like a flat bench dumbbell press for chest, right? Like a flat bench dumbbell press for chest. That movement, I can progress on that. And even like a low incline press with dumbbells would be kind of the same thing. I can progress on that movement pretty well. Obviously it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. And I don't know how much progression I have left in that movement in my career since I've come, quite a ways over 20 years. But I do like that movement. It does make sense to me. I don't really feel too much pain when I do that movement. Like, I can do that movement relatively pain-free. So when I think about that movement, it's like, all right, that's a nice connection. That's a nice overlap. It's going to make sense for me to leave some version of that movement in my training split most of the time, if not all of the time, right? Make some variations, go from flat to incline, or don't make any variations at all. I mean, however you want to splice it up. We've talked about, changing your program and things of that nature many, many times in the past. So I don't want to go down that route, I kind of went with a combo there. I don't want to go that way right here, right now. I kind of want to do a different thing. But when it comes to progressive overload, these are the types of things that I will be thinking about, right? Movements that jive with you, movements that don't cause you pain, and then thinking about ways to progressively overload that don't involve adding load, because that can be a lot on your joints. It can be a lot on your tendons. And there's plenty of other ways to progressively overload that don't involve more weight. And again, remember, our goal is not to be the strongest. Our goal is to look the best, right? Our goal is aesthetic in nature. Like, of course, we want to be healthy. We want to be fit. We want all those things, right? But specifically, we are after this for, the physique development. And the great thing about physique development is it doesn't matter how much you can bench press. Nobody cares how much you can bench press. Nobody cares how much you can leg press. Nobody cares whether you squat or not, right? Like, yes, there's a reason why these exercises have withstood the test of time. They're very, very good at recruiting a lot of muscle fibers. But if they don't make sense for you, then they don't make sense for you, and I wouldn't fight that. I wouldn't fight that at all. The other thing that I want to bring up today is recovery and work capacity. So there's a pretty good chance, there's a very, very good chance that you can't handle the volume that you could handle back in the day, right? That you can't handle the volume that you could handle back when you were in your 20s or your 30s. Now, there might be some exceptions to that rule. Like some of you are going to be watching or listening and be like, yeah, Jim, I'm actually doing more work than I did when I was in my 20s or my 30s. Well, that would be amazing. You, sir or madam, are the outlier. Like that's not going to be the case for people that have trained for a while. The recovery capacity is just not there. When I first had to come to terms with this, and honestly, this is a pretty recent thing for me. Like I would say that my recovery has changed significantly in just the last 3 years. Like 36 to 37, when I did my last 2019 was a competitive season for me, even though I didn't get on stage because Eli got sick at the very end. I still classify that as a competitive season because I literally was at the very end. I was dream tanned up. I was carb loaded. Like I had to withdraw from the competition like hours before we took the stage. So that was a full competition season for me for, all intents and purposes for my own mental record keeping. But 2017 was when I actually got on stage 2 times that year and all of those things. That's when I was 36. I was 36 years old when I did that season. And my work capacity training for those shows was drastically different than it is right now. My work capacity in 2019 was also pretty high. And so when I think about it now, it's like, wow, it's so much less. Now, this could be a product of, the fact that I'm a little bit softer than I normally am in the off season, kind of hashtag COVID struggles, hashtag quarantine struggles, even though we haven't been quarantined and, it's been months. I'm still hanging on to some quarantine poundage there, so there could be that aspect to it for sure. But also I'm working through some injuries, got the meniscus thing, whatever. But I still think that age is a part of this. I think it's absolutely a part of this. It was hard for me to come to terms with this at first, like to try to think, oh man, like I can't do what I could do before. Not necessarily from a strength standpoint, because strength-wise, I'm pretty much where I've been the last 5-6 years of my career. I'm talking about just from a work capacity standpoint, because I love to train. I think a lot of you out there probably love to train, and you're like, man, I don't really want to do less. Like I enjoy doing the amount that I do. I would like to even do more than what I'm currently doing. I wouldn't view this as a negative thing though. And here's what I mean. This is going to motivate you, maybe like it motivated me, to really do a very, very serious audit of your sets that you are doing. So again, to kind of use kind of a polar extreme example here, going back to like your early 20s to where you might be now, like 40, 42, 40, 30. Even if you're 49, hopefully you can take a little something away from this. Even if you're 55, hopefully you can take a little something away from what we're talking about today. But if you think back to your younger years, right? Let's say you went in there on a Monday and you trained chest, right? Because obviously you got to train chest on Monday. If you don't, if enough people don't, I'm pretty sure the earth reverses its spin on its axis. So we don't want to risk that. You get in there, you blast chest on Monday, right? And you do your typical, 18 to 20 working sets of chest. You do your barbell bench. You got to start a barbell bench. Maybe you do a dumbbell press. Then you do a pec deck. Then, of course, you got to do cable crossovers, hashtag pump chasers, right? You got to do it. You blast it with 18 to 20 sets. My question to you that you need to answer now about your former self, maybe 17 or 20 years ago. How many of those sets were really high quality sets? Like how many of those sets were you really, really hitting the intensity that you wanted to hit? It doesn't mean you had to go to failure. It doesn't mean that you had to go balls to the wall doing drop sets and, mechanical sets and rest balls and crazy stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying like how many of those sets actually delivered on what you wanted to go for that set? Like specifically from an RPE standpoint. Like you want to live between RPE of 6 to 8, right? And I'm just kind of projecting that on you. You may have a different number in your head, but I think most people that understand RPE have probably come to realize that, all right, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9 is a pretty good range to fall in, right? How many of those sets actually hit those numbers? Whatever numbers you were going for. Like how many of your 7s were actual 7s? How many of your 8s were actual 8s? How many of the time did you go for 8, but it was really more like a 5? RPE. How many of the time did you go for a 7 and it was really more like a 3 or a 4? Right? Like when I think back to like how I used to train in my 20s, and this was back when, I was doing basically everything wrong. And so this is, not a great example, or maybe it's the best example. I don't know. But if I went into a Monday session and hit 20 sets, 3 of them, maybe 4 of them were really high quality sets. A lot of them, like, don't get me wrong, I mean, I was doing something. I was moving forward. I was moving my body. And so there are clearly some benefits to doing that. But for those of us that are a little bit more serious, which is kind of who I'm catering to, at least in this video, I like to be a man of the people. Like, I want everybody that's interested in bodybuilding or physique development, beginner, intermediate, advanced, whatever, to be able to hopefully take away a little something from my videos. We all have the common denominator of physique development. I would say only a few of my sets were really, really strong. I would say only a few of my sets were really, really good. The rest of them were kind of junk sets. The rest of them were like, I wasn't really that close to failure at all. So now when I think about my work capacity today, to kind of bring this all full circle and just kind of tie it all off and, with a bow and kind of wrap up this point, it's like, okay, maybe I can't do 20 sets for chest. I mean, I don't have like a Monday chest day like I used to, so it's set up very differently from how it was anyway. But when I think about the whole week, maybe I can't do 20 sets of chest for the whole week. Maybe I can only do 10 or 9 or 12, right? But you know what? Those 9 or 10 or 12 sets now, having done some audits, some honest, like transparent audits with myself saying, all right, man, like where were you at with your intensity on the set? Like what were you trying to accomplish with that set? Did you achieve what you were trying to accomplish? I'll tell you what, man, it's very eye-opening. It's very eye-opening. And it really, really motivates you. It motivated me to really make every set count. So you maybe can't do the same volume as what you could do before when you just add up the pure raw numbers. But I would argue that if you're more thoughtful and you're more strategic and you're more honest with yourself, you can actually do less now, less total tonnage, and actually get more out of it. And so I wouldn't view this as a negative thing at all. I would actually view it as a very, very positive thing. So from a recovery standpoint, maybe you can't do what you wanted to do before, but I think it's okay. The next thing I want to talk about, so we talked about progressive overload a little bit, and then we talked about recovery and kind of rest and kind of thinking about your work capacity and those kinds of things. A couple more things I want to talk about, and one more thing I want to talk about, and then I'll leave you kind of with my own personal goal now that I'm kind of right here on the precipice of my own 40s, and maybe it'll help you guys think through your own goals for your own 40s or your own next decade or next, chapter of your life, wherever you might be. Even if you're in your 30s, hopefully you can take away a little something from this. One of the things that I really wish I knew when I was in my 20s and my 30s that I really didn't quite understand and I never really quite appreciated until just recently. I think most people significantly overestimate two things. I think they overestimate how much they can do in a given day to progress towards their goals. Again, physique development, I mean, this would actually apply across the board, but specifically physique development-wise, I think a lot of people overestimate how much they need to do, how much they can do in a given day. Like they think, oh man, like I can really get after it today, like blah, 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 blah. I think a lot of people overestimate that when they're kind of all juiced up and they're kind of all ready to go. I think a lot of people also overestimate what they need to do in order to achieve their goals in any given day. I think people want to kind of embrace this go big or go home mindset. I mean, that's why it's a phrase. That's why people say that, because people love that mindset. And that's what gets people fired up on Instagram. That's what gets people fired up on TikTok. That's what gets people fired up, kind of across the board. I mean, I got to be honest, it gets me fired up a little bit. But now that I've, thought about it for a while and I'm trying to be a little bit more strategic with my training, I'm like, all right, how can I take this juice that I'm feeling right now? Like, how can I take this motivation, this inspiration, this dedication, this drive? How can I take it and how can I channel it? How can I channel it into something that I know, given all my experience now, because I'm 40 and I'm brittle and I'm seasoned, right? I'm like a cast iron skillet. Cast iron skillets aren't brittle, but you guys follow me. How can I take this and channel it into something that's going to be really wildly effective? Well, I think overestimating what you can do in a given day, overestimating what you need to do in a given day, actually leads people to underestimate what the power of consistency over time can really do for you. And so when I'm feeling kind of fired up and I'm feeling kind of, just over the top, a little extra based on, a podcast I listen to or a song I listen to or a YouTube video or a daily shred that I watch. I sit there, watch my own content all the time. That's basically how I spend my evenings, with 3 small children. When I'm feeling fired up and I'm feeling, really jazzed up, what I do is I channel that and I say, all right, here's what I need to do. I need to just execute my plan today. And I need to take this drive right now and I need to extrapolate this out into the next week and the next month. Because what it's about is it's not about today. It's not about who can go the hardest today. It's about let's build some stamina, right? Let's build some staying power so that 3 weeks from now, I'm still going strong. So that 6 weeks from now, I'm still going strong. So that, hey, next Thursday, I'm still feeling alive and I'm ready to go. And so I would encourage you all to do that. Think about the overestimating what you can do in a given day, the overestimating what you need to do in a given day, and the underestimating of the power of consistency over time. I think a lot of people miss this. And now that we're in our 40s, you might feel, I might feel, someone might feel like, man, like I've there's not much time left, right? Like the hourglass is about to be empty. Like, man, we're not quite at that point yet, so we don't have to go down that road. But still, you might feel a little differently than how you felt in your 20s and your 30s. I know I certainly have, and I know I certainly am right now. And so this is very real for me. But we can still take this and we can channel it into what really matters and what's going to be highly effective. You don't have to do it all today. You don't have to try to get it all done this afternoon because it's not going to happen, first of all. And second of all, there's just a much better way to approach this. So that was the other thing that I kind of wanted to say. And then to close this thing down, as I look at my notes here, there's one more thing that I wanted to bring up. And this is going to be specifically how I am approaching my, oh wow, this is super long, 26 minutes. Yowzas. This, it's like I've never seen my own show. My own goal for my 40s. So when I think about, I've been training for about 20 years now, and I've been a competitive bodybuilder for about the same amount of time. I started training seriously about the same time I became a competitive bodybuilder. I think about my 20s and I think about my 30s. My 20s, that decade, and I think about what do I want my 40s to look like? What do I want my 40s to stand for? What are my overriding goals going to be of my 40s? So my 20s, that's when I discovered bodybuilding. That's when I found bodybuilding. I didn't really know what I was doing, as evidenced by most of that decade. And I didn't really have any like big lofty goals. I didn't have any definitive goals. I never like sat myself down and said like, hey, what do you want to do? What are you trying to accomplish here? I just very much went kind of month to month, like paycheck to paycheck style, like in the bodybuilding world. And so it was kind of like just floating, just drifting through the wind. My 30s. So my 20s, it was not super great. Like my performance on stage was not great. My career as a bodybuilder was just getting started, and it wasn't really anything to write home about. My 30s, however, this is when things started to really change for me. This is when I started to do a lot better in my competitions because I took it more seriously. I was a lot more strategic, and I was a lot more thoughtful, and I tried new things, and I grew and I expanded, and I just performed better. And this is when I started to win, and my best season was back in 2017 when I was 36. And so I started to win. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Like, I actually think I could do well in this sport, given the things I've learned and now given kind of my new mindset and my new approach to all this. What do I want my 40s to look like? I have two goals for my 40s, and I'll leave you guys with this, and I'll let you guys go. I was thinking today it was going to be like 7-8 minutes. We're at like a half hour now. I want to, number one, it's not really a 1-2 thing. It's like a 1A, 1B type thing. I want to turn pro. I'd like to finish the job that I started in 2017. I almost turned pro. My physique wasn't really pro ready anyway, so even if I had won, I probably still wouldn't have felt quite satisfied with turning pro. I want to have the pro physique that I was going for in 2017. I want to finish the job. I'd like to turn pro. I'd like to turn pro. I'd like to compete as a pro, and I'd like to just have some fun on the pro stage. I think that would be really, really cool to maybe step on stage against some of these guys that I've looked up to for a really long time. I think I can do it. I don't think I'm gonna be like a world champion. I don't think I'm gonna maybe I'll step on stage for the world championships and just get gorilla smacked. I don't think I'm going to win any world titles. I just don't think that's in the cards for me, but that's okay. I don't really care about that necessarily, but I do think turning pro is a realistic goal for me, and then competing as a pro is a realistic goal. But my second goal, and this is arguably as important as the first goal, in some ways it might be even more important, because now that I am 40, I have small children, and bodybuilding has taken on a different meaning in my life. I would like to go down one more level in my walking around off-season leanness. So in my 20s, it was a train wreck. Like, I competed around 190, and I would walk around usually between 220 and 230 just in everyday life. And it was a train wreck. In my 30s, this is when I finally kind of started to right the ship a little bit. I competed, between, high 160s and 185, 190 in my early 30s. But I started to walk around a lot lighter. And just from an overall health standpoint, this had a big impact on me. Cholesterol went down, blood work looked a lot better, like all that kind of stuff, right? I would walk around between 195 and 205. I would like to take that down one more level. I would like to maybe walk around between, 188 and 198 most of the time. I think that that's realistic for me. I think that that is doable for me. And I think that would have a really, really big impact on me from a health standpoint. I think I would feel a lot better most of the time, and I think I would just be overall a lot healthier. So those are my two goals for my 40s, and I just kind of wanted to, I've been meaning to do this video for a while. And part of the reason why I haven't done it is maybe because I knew it was going to be a long one. I didn't think it was going to be this long necessarily, but nevertheless, here we are. But I wanted to get this out there, man. I mean, I've only been 40 now for a couple of months, so the ink is barely dry on my updated birth certificate. And so it's good. It's good to have it out there, and it's good to have, I guess it would be like a life certificate. It wouldn't really be a birth certificate. This ship's going down fast. So now we've got it out there. So now it's out there, and those are my goals for my 40s. I would love to hear what your goals are. Like, what are your goals right now? They could be for your 40s or just for the next year, for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years of your training. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? I would really, really genuinely love to hear, what you kind of have in store for yourself. So, man, if you guys made it this far, like, that's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. I really appreciate you guys. If you guys want to subscribe to the channel, that would help a lot. If you want to leave a comment below, that would also help a lot. I would love to know what your goals are for, your 40s or for the next decade or for the next 5 years or for the next 2 years of your training. Like, share it with me. Share it with all of us. I would love to hear what your goals are. If you want to like this video or share it with a friend, that would also help out a ton. And that's it, man. Training in your 40s. That's the Daily Shred. And I will see you guys next time.